What's up, guys? Outside today. Recently, a guy left a really good comment on one of my videos, and I say really good not because I fully agree with it, because it's not entirely true, but he showed that he understood the concept of what I was discussing really well. And even though he came to a different conclusion, and I want to argue the nuances of that conclusion and why you actually do have a degree of control over your life from a genetic determinist perspective, not an overall physics determinist perspective. I think you guys know my view on that. It's actually one of my tattoos. It's a pretty way of saying it. Fate, destiny, you know. So from a physics standpoint, yeah, I don't believe in free will. I believe free will is an illusion. Everything's 100% determined, and that includes the particles in your brain. That's a topic for another day. But I know that not all of you believe that. And, you know, more power to you. And either way, I've rationalized how you could still live with motivation, even if you believe in a fully deterministic world, as I clearly do. In a nutshell, it comes down to believing that you're determined for the right things. And you can feel free to check out that video if you're interested. But from a genetic determinist perspective, I want to explain to you, I've made some diagrams to help you understand this. I want to explain to you that you actually do have a degree of control, even though I outlined in my last video, that hour-long video, why environment isn't as environmental as you thought. And it's because of the runaway feedback loop, what I like to call heritability snowballing. It's this compounding effect. And this is why heritability actually increases as we age. And that's the undeniable proof behind this. As we get older, we become more like our true selves. So, no matter what environment you're born in, this has been proven in all these twin studies, identical twin studies and adoption studies, that as these individuals grow older, they end up becoming extremely similar, more and more similar, and it's because they're becoming more and more of who they really are. And you can watch that whole video if you're interested on heritability, snowballing, and how being a product of your environment is a myth. But environment does still play a factor. I made sure to mention that in the video, that environment does play a factor, but my reason for making that video is that people are attributing significantly more weight to environment than it deserves. All psychiatrists and psychologists, they can't dismiss genetics completely at this point, but they're still not attributing the weight it truly deserves. So anyway, even though this was what I was saying in the video, I was trying to make it clear how much weight genetics do hold. Today's video is essentially the opposite. I'm trying to tell you that you actually do have a degree of control depending on which environmental factors you're exposed to. Because remember, environment isn't how they used to understand environment years ago. Like this, it's not this. Environment is what happens to you. Environment is what you interact with, things that occur, like your relationships, like getting fired from your job. Like, environment is very complex. There's tons of variables that go into it. And so at the end of that video, I made the point saying that it's actually a good thing if you're aware of your genetic predispositions. And that's the key word, predispositions. Genetics aren't 100% determined. They're probabilistic predispositions. You have to understand that term. But the whole point of that video is to explain the significant weight of these predispositions, especially as you age and grow older. They end up holding more and more weight. So anyway, at the end of the video, I came to, I wanted to give like some kind of positive finish to the video, like a positive conclusion. And I said, well, it's actually a positive if you're aware of these genetic factors, because then you're able to more properly curate your environment appropriately to counteract some of those things. This is something that Robert Plowman recommends too. I gave the example of how Robert Plowman is aware that, you know, his parents may have been overweight, and weight is 60% heritable, like being obese. And so he would try to curate his environment. He wouldn't keep snacks in his cabinet so much, because it's not all about willpower, and willpower is a genetic thing too. All the behavioral traits are genetic. So he would come home at 3 a.m. and if there's snacks there, he'd be like, fuck it. I'm just gonna eat the snacks. Fuck it. And someone left a comment addressing this, which I thought was a fantastic comment. I couldn't find it. I don't know if he deleted it maybe, or I'll look again. If I could find it, I'll put it on the screen. It was an excellent comment, very long, and it showed that he perfectly understood the concept of heritability snowballing, which was the purpose of the video, and obviously he watched the entire video if he's addressing something at the end. So props to this guy. Although we're kind of disagreeing with him today, I just want to give you your kudos and say, like, you're very intelligent and you clearly understand this very well. But there's just a bit of nuance that I need to add to this. Anyway, so he added the point that, well, technically, you know, you being exposed to this fact of how heritable certain things are, you being exposed to this knowledge, isn't really an environmental factor. And I said in the video something like, a little snarky comment like, you're welcome, because this is positive. This is a positive environmental factor. That's something I like to do in my videos. I call my videos environmental factors, because when you're watching this video right now, it's gonna have a little bit of weight in influencing you. And this is where we go back to the free will conversation from a physics perspective. It's like all of this stuff is predetermined, and my video is one of those variables. And it's true. But then he took it a step further with heritability snowballing, say, well, it's still all genetic, you know, something like weight, even though it's completely irrelevant to, he didn't say this, but I'm going to try to help him with his point. Even though it's not the genetics related to the weight, it's still genetic, because you had genetics that made you predispositioned to find the Julius Perceiver channel in the first place. And, you know, that's a great point. I was like laughing when I read it. I was like, yeah, you know, this is something we're going to talk about today too, when it comes to the very complex and nuanced combinations of multiple of these genetics, and how you have to kind of like weigh them together to decide if you're going to go against your true biology or not. So yeah, that's what we're going to be getting into today. But yeah, he made a great point of he used the heritability snowballing properly. He clearly understood it well, in that knowing that my video, you watching my video, isn't entirely environmental. You know, it's not because of the weight genetics, but instead it's because of your like neurodivergent genetics. It's because like you think a different way, that you were drawn to my YouTube channel, and then you were exposed to the environmental factor. So even though it's not related to the weight genetics, it still is genetic to a very high degree. So kudos to him for pointing that out. It definitely made me laugh. But I have to emphasize that even though I think I agreed with him in the replies, I was like, you're probably right, man, because more just like joking. I was like, you know what, I should really address this. I really should address this, because there is more nuance to it, and I really don't want you guys thinking that environment has no impact at all, and like these videos you're watching now have absolutely no impact, because they most certainly do. Anyway, so my videos can have an environmental factor. They can be an environmental influence on you. The same way any positive you know, teacher or whatever, like any book you read, that's like an environmental factor. And while yes, like the guy said in the comments, the way you got to that, there's genetics involved too, it still is an environmental factor. And another thing I wanted to add is that he said in the comment, like, people know that they're fat. people know what they have to do to get skinny. They just have to stop eating in a caloric surplus, but they still can't do it. And this is where I wanted to say, like, this isn't entirely true. This actually is not true. For a lot of people, as they age, this ends up becoming true, because remember, heritability increases. Like, you could only fight it for so long until it gets more and more difficult as you age. But there's plenty of young people who grew up as fat kids and ended up fighting this genetic predisposition. So that's why I can't, like, just fully agree with that comment. Like, even though I have to give him his props for the nuance and understanding it, it's not true. It's simply not. There are plenty of examples of people fighting their true biology and fighting their genetic predispositions. And being fat is just one example of how you could fight your own biology. But I really wanted to focus. Well, my camera actually overheated, so had to come back here. Anyway, we're going to continue. I try to do these without any cuts to make it feel like it's more of a conversation, some actual human connection in this very atomized world now. So yeah, I try my best to do these videos on the Raw channel without cuts. And I also don't think most YouTubers are even capable of that. So, you know, it's fun, at least when it comes to articulating these more interesting thoughts. Anyway, so where did we leave off? I think we left off on me telling you guys where I disagreed with that individual's comment, and it was that he was saying people know that they're fat, so they're exposed to the environmental knowledge. They know that they're fat. They know what they need to do. They could watch a YouTube video and see, like, okay, I just need to go in a caloric deficit. I need to exercise, and yet they still don't. And I would have to say that's not actually entirely true. As they age, it does become more true that it becomes more and more difficult for them to fight their genetic predisposition because of the snowballing effect of heritability. And in general, for weight in particular, like, there's simple facts like your metabolism is going to slow, for instance. And like, being fat obviously isn't like one genetic, like, there's no one single gene for accumulating fat. It's a combination of many, many different genetics. And this was something that used to be advantageous for our ancestors. And there were some people who evolved from descendants who were in environments where food was abundant, and thus those people are less likely to hold a lot of fat. And then there were other people who would have to go days or weeks without food, and so they evolved successfully by the ones who would accumulate more fat would be more likely to survive and reproduce. And thus, if you naturally tend to get fat very easily, like your metabolism isn't high, and also your hunger is just never really quenched, like you're always hungry. Yeah, this isn't just a willpower thing, and willpower in itself is a highly genetic thing as well. But it's not just that. It's literally something that is beyond the scope of your control. There's genetics at play that make certain people very likely to accumulate fat easier. And this isn't like a problem. You know, this isn't like a fault in their biology. This is precisely how it was supposed to be. But now we're in a modern environment where aesthetics, you know, matter way more than a survival tactic like that when food is readily available. So it's now becoming, in the modern environment, an objective good to be in shape, lean, aesthetic, whether you're a man or a female. It doesn't matter. So there are some things, we're going to address this, some things that you know are objectively good, some things that you know are objectively bad. Everything's subjective, you know, but we're going off like the broad consensus. So being fat, for example, where we're going to use that as our starting example for when you need to decide if it is worth it to fight your biology or not. Because I often give the advice, just be yourself, bro. You know, the age-old blue pill advice, just be yourself, bro, that the black pill community mocks and makes fun of all the time, similar to like the just go outside, bro advice. Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that just be yourself, bro, is for the most part good advice. It's living in congruence with your biology. And we're going to get into an example of somebody who's living incongruent to their biology, an example you may remember from the main channel. So we'll get into that and the consequences of living far too incongruent to your biology. But does this mean you should then live completely congruent to your biology? Does this mean if you're predispositioned to be fat, then you should just let yourself get fat? Does this mean if you're predisposed to being addicted to alcohol and other substances, you should just live true to your biology and allow yourself to get addicted? No, obviously not. It's crazy that I need to fucking say this shit, but some people, they're not going to understand nuance, so I do need to spoon feed this. There are objective goods and objective bads in the world. And now, like, obviously everything's subjective. We know. But broadly considered by the overwhelming majority of human beings, being fat in the modern environment is an objective bad. So that means no matter how difficult it is, no matter how hard it is to fight your biology, this is one of those things where you should try to fight it. But I do want to clarify that it's going to be harder for some people than others. So being fat, this is something that it's 60% heritable, like 40 to 70% heritable. We're not going to list that for everything because some things you could get diagnosed for and know for sure if you have it and to like what degree you have it. But being fat, like being naturally fat, you might not for sure know. Like you might not for sure know. So you got to like look at your childhood, look at your parents. Did your parents, end up being fat at your age? Were you a fat child, for instance? And in general, like, are you fat right now? And if, like, all those are true, you're probably towards this end of the spectrum. I don't know if this is gonna... Can this focus? I don't know. So you're probably towards this end of the spectrum, right? Where it's gonna be a lot more difficult for you relative to somebody who's closer towards the middle or closer towards the naturally low body fat percentage side. So you're going to be able to add some intervention. And if you add intervention, that person who is all the way on that side of the spectrum could migrate farther down this area. And this is where the environment comes into play. This is where something like my videos could have that environmental influence on you. But again, I do agree with the guy's comment saying that it's still technically genetic because you had the genetics to stumble upon this channel in the first place. Because we're probably all fucking autistic and neurodivergent, which is highly genetic, just genetic. And it guided you here. So yeah, from the snowballing effect, it's technically genetic. It's a very nuanced thing. But let's just look at it from this surface perspective. With the environmental factor of my video, you being aware of the fact that you're at a predisposition where you're likely to accumulate fat, you being aware of that, and you combine that with other intervention, like you making it a part of your habits to go to the gym, even if that's not something that would naturally be in your behavior, because of this new knowledge you have. Then you could also take it a step further, which is what's going to be needed for many people on this side of the spectrum, and that's going to pharmaceutical intervention. Something like retatrutide, for example, the GLP-3. For somebody who is highly likely to be obese, if they use severe intervention, like pharmaceutical intervention, it's very likely they're going to be able to overcome that predisposition relatively easily. That doesn't mean they're gonna, get as lean as easily as somebody who's already naturally, not predispositioned to be fat. They're still gonna find it more difficult than those individuals, but they'll find it easier than somebody who's, say, more towards the middle without that environmental factor, without that pharmaceutical intervention. Now, fat is one of these things that, again, it's objectively bad, so this isn't going to be one of those things that you need to decide. But I just wanted to clarify how, the intervention could offset it to such a high degree. even though this person was like predisposed to being obese, it is still very possible for them to migrate towards the other side of the spectrum. And that's how I want you guys to try to envision all of these particular traits that you have, everything that makes up who you are. Try to envision it like this kind of spectrum that I'm showing you, where you could be towards one end, towards the other end, and then the part that's in your control, again, the part that's in your control is where you add that intervention into the mix to try to offset your genetic predisposition. Okay, because remember, it's predisposition, it's probabilistic. So now, here's another example of someone else who's fat, somebody who's significantly more likely to be obese, somebody who's even farther on that end of the spectrum. If that individual were to use the same interventions that the first person did, you know, they're going to the gym, they're changing their diet, they're changing the things that they have in their pantry so they don't crash out at night, and also they're using pharmaceutical intervention like retatrutide, even though it's all the same. You know, if we did an experiment, we took those two individuals, kept everything the same, they're only going to progress up to this point, which is towards the middle, where a lot of people just are naturally. Isn't that unfortunate? It is unfortunate, but remember, being fat isn't objective bad, so even though they can't make much progress here compared to the other person, it's still one of those things that you need to fight regardless. But I wanted to make it clear that some people, they're going to make less progress than others despite the same interventions, despite the same environmental factors. It's going to be harder for some people. A good analogy I like to use is video games. Like if you ever played Call of Duty, you can play on rookie level or veteran level, or there's one in the middle. So some people are living life on veteran difficulty in terms of certain attributes that they're trying to change. You get mad at these hobos on the street who, you know, get addicted to drugs, and it's all their fault. They got addicted to drugs. Even not considering the free will conversation, just from acknowledging the facts of genetics, well, they may have had a higher predisposition to being addicted than you. You could have both been exposed to the drugs, and you could have both even tried them once, but his predisposition is going to make him more likely to be addicted, for example. Anyway, let's move on to something else. ADHD. Let's say you get diagnosed with ADHD, so you 100% know that you have ADHD, and let's say you have severe ADHD, right? You're all the way on the end of the spectrum where it's going to be severe for you. So what do you do in this case if you're all the way on this end of the spectrum? Well, you obviously can try to fight it. You know, there's certain medications you could be taking to try to fight it, but like we remember from the fat example, even though you can add lots of intervention, since you're not coming from the moderate area, you're coming from the severe area, you could really only get to that moderate to mild area. You're still going to be dealing with ADHD to a degree, and this is where you might want to consider embracing your biology. This is where you might want to consider the potential benefits of having ADHD and potentially working in fields that would require ADHD, being able to rapidly shift your focus, like working in an emergency room, for example, like being able to constantly shift from one monitor to the next monitor, jotting things down, operating fast. If you're working in a fast-paced environment like that, ADHD is actually going to benefit you. And that's the whole reason these negative traits exist within us today, because at one point in evolution, they were advantageous, particularly because communities were built up of a diverse range of people that all had a certain role. You know, humans have always been collaborating. That's what made us so interesting. So there were some people in the village who had roles to be, you know, on guard, for example. There were some people who had roles to be more like farmers. And so, like, what about those people on guard? What traits would they have had? And that's where we get into the next one. anxiety. So let's say you end up over here, for anxiety. You just have moderate anxiety. Because it's not that significant, perhaps you just want to do some intervention, like some exposure therapy. You might not even need medication. You probably don't need medication if it's just moderate anxiety. I believe that I used to have moderate anxiety, actually. And I still will notice anxiety sometimes come up when I'm meeting somebody very important. Like I met Alec Baldwin once, and I asked him for a picture, and I felt my adrenaline rise. So I definitely do have it to a degree, but I haven't felt it come up that often, and I think it's because of so much environmental exposure that I've been accustomed to my entire life. I've been an actor since I was a young child, always in front of cameras, always in front of large stages of people. I even would do the talent show at my elementary school alone, playing the guitar in front of people. I did like a fight, I had to fight and risk getting knocked out in front of huge crowds of people. And when you do more and more of these kinds of things, it makes everything by comparison seem trivial. And so I think that's how I got over my anxiety, by just doing extremely like high risk things like this. And then everything else by comparison, it just doesn't matter. Like I never feel anxiety with just like regular interactions anymore, but I feel like without my background, I probably would. Anyway, a bit of a tangent, but yeah, with moderate anxiety, this is something that you could probably fight even without pharmaceutical intervention. And so this is something, if you're in this area, you probably don't need to live true to your biology and embrace the anxiety. But let's say hypothetically, like you were all the way towards this end of the spectrum, like you had severe anxiety on the other hand. Well, in that case, you may want to embrace it. Because while, yes, you could fight it, add in some pharmaceutical intervention, you're still going to end up towards the mild to moderate area. And so you're still going to have it, and then you might have to consider, should I start embracing my anxiety and living congruent with it? Because this is how my ancestors evolved too. They lived congruent with their anxiety by being the people who were on guard, the hunters who were like extra alert for danger in the village. So perhaps you go down a lane, a career lane, where anxiety is actually going to benefit you, being extra alert. So you have to like analyze these things about yourself and truly understand yourself on a genetic level. And then you have to make the decisions knowing what's objectively good and bad. You have to objectively make the decisions. Is this going to be more in my self-interest to fight, or should I just embrace it and embrace that aspect of my biology? And that's the nuance in this. Now, let's talk about something a lot more interesting than something as simple as ADHD and anxiety. What about the more complex combinations? When you're trying to decide who you are as a person, how to behave overall as a person, let's take beta versus alpha. Like, do you consider yourself more of a beta, or do you consider yourself more of an alpha? If you guys will recall from the original video I made from living incongruent to your biology, the incong pill, and then we saw the incong cell. So that was somebody who is living very incongruent to their biology. If you guys recall, you could tell by the way he looks, you could tell with his demeanor, because these complex combinations, while simplified on here, this will hopefully just give you an idea of it. So like you have obviously the physical aspect of it, which is going to be the majority for something like alpha versus beta, mostly your physical genetics, but also what comes into play is some of your behavioral genetics too, like do you have anxiety, for example? That's going to become a factor too. And so these are more complex. These are things where you have to consider many different attributes about who you are as a person. Most of which, in this specific context, would be physical, but in other complex scenarios, in other complex things that you're trying to analyze about yourself, you're often going to have to synthesize many of these different genetic behavioral traits and physical traits about yourself to come to the overall conclusion. And there's no precise calculation for this. There's no precise formula. Maybe if we blow up, some autist is going to make a website to fucking calculate this. I mean, I could probably whip that up in like 30 minutes. But I'm not going to do that because it's not necessary. And we do want to retard max too, honestly. Like, you don't want to be thinking too much. But you want to look at yourself, like analyze yourself, who you are as a person. That guy in that video, he was acting very incongruent to his biology, and he was probably watching a lot of the alpha YouTubers, like giving alpha dating advice, saying like, yeah, you need to talk to girls like you're a badass. You need to talk to girls and just lay it down and not give a single fuck. And that would work for Chad, especially in like a club environment. But this guy was fucking retarded. He not only was acting incongruent to his biology, but the setting was incorrect as well. He was doing it in like a fucking 7-Eleven. Anyway, so he's somebody who is all the way on this side of the spectrum. He's all the way over here. So in order for him to offset his biology, he would need like significant environmental intervention. Significant. Not only would he have to, completely rewire his brain, not only that, but he would need physical intervention too. Like, he'd probably need some extra limb lengthening surgery to compensate for the typical pheno that he's giving off. You would need to go to the gym and gain a lot of muscle. There's just so much that he would need to do to just like probably get to the middle of this. And so it's people like that you have to think they're probably better off embracing like the more blue-pilled advice. Just like try to be a good person, be kind, and just accept where you are. Focus on money maxing, focus on then, yeah, it's an unfortunate reality because obviously like we all want to be the He-Man, because there's two female selection strategies. We all want to be the He-Man. We all want to be the alpha. But the truth is, not all of us are born to be that. So, yeah, you have to think about that a lot. You have to analyze yourself and decide, am I able to offset my biology? Like, can I do it? That guy, I don't know. You let me know in the comments if you think he could have done it. I don't know. But like pheno is a big part of it. Like it's just like the way you look in your face often. There's certain attributes that come together in like the facial harmony that no matter what you do, it's just you're always going to appear that way. It's not something that I could articulate very, very well in a comprehensive way. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's it. I wanted to not only address that guy's comment and say that you actually do have a degree of control and that we have seen plenty of people fight their biology for the objective goods, like being fat, we know is objectively bad. We know you need to fight that. But with the exception that I will say, over time with the snowballing, the heritability snowballing effect, even if you fight your biology now, as you grow older, it's going to become more and more difficult to do so. But these are the years that matter most anyway, when you're in your 20s to 30s. So yeah, it'll get harder as you get older, and people will end up becoming more and more like themselves as they age. But I just wanted to like make the point that it is possible to fight your biology. But the nuance in it is that you shouldn't always. There's some times where it's not in your best interest to fight your biology. Sometimes you want to embrace your biology. You have to deal with the cards that you were dealt. Sometimes, because I wanted you guys to envision all of this like on a spectrum. There's no way to precisely calculate this, but like if you're relatively intelligent, which many of you guys actually are, the algorithm has a fantastic way of bringing you guys together to congregate here. So you have to think intelligently. It's not going to be like some precise calculation that you know for sure, but you intuitively, you kind of know. You're kind of going to know if it's just too incongruent with your biology. And then that's when you start to just decide to embrace being yourself, bro. But then again, remember the nuance in it that I can't believe I have to explain, but I just know some people eventually are going to say like, well, if I have a predisposition to be addicted to alcohol, should I just live true to my bio? Dude, like, people actually like try to counterpoints like this without, oh, God. So yeah, I hope this helps you understand a bit better. Try to go through life, just like making little mental notes about like how you behave, like your natural tendencies, what you're naturally inclined to do. Make notes about that. Not too often. Remember, retard max. You don't want to be in your head too much. But like when you're alone and like no one's really paying attention to you, got a second to yourself, just like think about it for a little. This isn't something you need to go to the library and study. You're yourself 24/7. It's a very easy thing to study. So just like when you have a second, just think like, why did I make that decision? Another thing to look at is your parents. Like, what are your parents like, and what are your grandparents like? And of course, remember that genetic recombination has lots of variants. It's highly randomized, but you are still 50% similar to your parents. But remember, you're 50% different from your siblings. So there's a lot of nuance here, guys. But just use your fucking head. That's what it comes down to. Use your fucking head. And you're going to be able to know when it's appropriate for you to try to override your biology for especially like those objective goods, things that we know are objectively good, like being in shape. You know to override your biology then, or at least try your best to. And then there's other scenarios where if you can benefit from that negative trait, you know, maybe just embrace it if you're so far on that side of the spectrum. So hopefully this has helped you like visualize these things about yourself a little bit. And yeah, I gotta get to work. These are just like, I make these videos because I need to tell someone about this shit that I'm thinking about, and it's been so therapeutic to have an audience that like actually understands this. God bless the algorithm. Yeah, I gotta get to work now, but I just need to get these things off my chest sometimes, and then I'll come across a comment like this. I'm like, I gotta address that. That he just made a good point. But yeah, this has been fun, guys. I've really been enjoying this raw channel.